Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at something we all know a little too well: family dynamics.
The good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yeah, exactly. And our guide today is going to be a book called Understanding Family Dynamics: Influences, Challenges, and Improvement. And it's really interesting because this book really does cover the whole spectrum of family life, from childhood to adulthood to when you have kids of your own.
To elder care.
To elder care, yeah.
Yeah.
And I love that because, we always talk about how family shapes us, but this book really dives deep into all the different ways that happens.
Right? Like across the lifespan.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's not just about, your childhood or your teenage years. It's about how those experiences continue to influence us even as adults.
Even as we become the older generation.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that a lot of people don't really think about. We kind of assume that once we leave the nest, we're free from all that family stuff.
But it comes back to haunt you.
But it totally comes back to haunt you. It's like those patterns, those dynamics, they're ingrained in us.
Yeah, it's like an invisible blueprint.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the things that really jumped out at me in this book was how much emphasis they put on the early years. Like early childhood.
Yeah, the foundation.
The foundation, exactly.
Yeah.
And it's not just about, having a happy childhood. It's about something called secure attachment.
Right.
Which I'm sure a lot of our listeners have heard of.
Yeah.
But this book really breaks down why it's so important.
And how it impacts us later in life.
Exactly. Yeah. So maybe we should start there. Like, what is secure attachment and how can parents create that for their kids?
So basically, secure attachment is about creating a sense of safety and security for a child. It's about being consistently responsive to their needs, both physically and emotionally.
So it's about being predictable.
Yeah, predictable and reliable. Like, think about it from a kid's perspective. The world is a big, scary place, and you're totally dependent on your caregivers for everything.
So if your caregivers are unpredictable.
If they're inconsistent or unavailable, that can be really stressful for a child.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, even as adults, we crave predictability and stability.
Right. Exactly. So imagine how much more important it is for a child who's still developing their understanding of the world.
So what are some practical tips for parents who are trying to create that secure attachment? Like, I'm thinking, most parents are juggling a million things, work life, all that.
Right. Well, first of all, it's important to remember that you don't have to be perfect.
Thank goodness.
No one is perfect. And kids don't need perfect parents. They need good enough parents.
Good enough parents. I like that.
Yeah. And good enough parenting is about being present and engaged as much as possible. It's about responding to your child's cues with sensitivity and warmth.
So it's about quality time.
Quality time, definitely. But it's also about the little things, like having predictable routines.
Like bedtime routines?
Yeah, exactly. Bedtime routines, mealtime routines, just those little things that create a sense of structure and predictability for a child.
And that reduces stress, right?
Yeah. Exactly. Because when a child knows what to expect, they feel safer and more secure.
Which frees them up to explore and learn and grow.
Exactly.
Now, secure attachment isn't just about making babies happy. It's actually about setting them up for success in life.
It's about laying the foundation for healthy emotional development.
Which is huge.
Yeah.
So we've talked about the importance of secure attachment in early childhood. But I'm curious, as kids grow older, those family dynamics start to shift.
Right, like adolescence.
Yeah, adolescence is a whole other ballgame.
Yeah.
So how can families support teenagers without, smothering them or getting in their way?
That's a great question. And it's something that a lot of parents struggle with.
For sure.
Because on the one hand, teenagers are still developing. They still need guidance and support from their families.
Right.
But on the other hand, they're also starting to assert their independence. They're figuring out who they are separate from their parents.
So it's like a push and pull.
Exactly, a push and pull. And it can be really tricky to find that balance.
So what does that balance look like? Like, what are some concrete things that parents can do to support their teenagers during this time?
Well, I think one of the most important things is to listen.
Listen without judgment.
Exactly. Because teenagers are going through a lot of changes, both physically and emotionally. And they need to feel like they can talk to their parents about what they're going through.
Without feeling like they're going to be judged or criticized?
Right. And it's also important to give them space to make their own mistakes.
Well, that's hard.
I know it's hard, but it's so important because that's how they learn and grow.
Yeah. I mean, think about it. We all learned by making mistakes.
Right. Exactly. So we can't expect teenagers to be perfect.
They're going to mess up.
They're going to mess up. And that's okay.
As long as they learn from it.
As long as they learn from it. And as long as they know that their parents are there to support them through it.
Yeah. I mean, ideally, family is that safe space
Yeah.
where you can experiment and make mistakes and know that you're still loved unconditionally.
Exactly. And that's so important for teenagers who are already feeling insecure and unsure of themselves.
Right, because adolescence is all about figuring out who you are and where you fit in the world.
And it's a really confusing time.
It's a confusing time, for sure. So having that support system at home can make a world of difference.
It can make all the difference.
So we've talked about early childhood, we've talked about adolescence, but, family dynamics continue to evolve even as we become adults.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's actually something that this book really dives into.
Yeah, I was fascinated by that section because I think a lot of people assume that once you're an adult, you're kind of free from all that family baggage.
But it still influences us.
It totally still influences us.
Yeah.
Like even if we're not living with our parents anymore, even if we've moved across the country,
Even if we've gone no contact.
even if we've got no contact, those early experiences, those family dynamics, they're still shaping how we interact with the world, how we form relationships, how we view ourselves.
It's like an invisible thread that connects us to our past.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And sometimes that thread can be a source of strength and support, but other times it can be a source of pain and conflict.
Right. Because, let's face it, families can be complicated.
Oh, they can be so complicated.
They can be the best and the worst thing in our lives.
Yeah, and this book doesn't shy away from that. It actually talks about the potential downsides of a family-first mentality.
Which is interesting.
Yeah, because, we're always told to put family first.
Right. Family above all else.
But this book argues that sometimes that can actually be detrimental.
Yeah, like it can stifle individual growth.
Exactly. Like what if your dream job takes you across the country away from your aging parents?
Right. Or what if you're in a relationship that your family doesn't approve of?
Or what if you simply need some space to figure out who you are outside of your family role?
Exactly.
So it's about finding that balance again, right?
It's about balancing individual needs with family obligations.
And sometimes that means making tough choices.
It does. But it's important to remember that you're not a bad person for prioritizing your own well-being.
Right, because ultimately you can't pour from an empty cup.
Exactly.
So if you're constantly putting your family's needs ahead of your own time, you're going to burn out.
You're going to resent them.
Yeah, and that's not good for anyone.
So it's about finding that sweet spot where everyone's needs are being met.
Which is easier said than done.
Oh, definitely. It's
Yeah.
an ongoing process.
And it requires a lot of communication.
A lot of communication and a lot of self-awareness.
Yeah, because you have to know what your own needs are before you can even start to communicate them to others.
Right. And you have to be willing to set boundaries.
Oh, boundaries are so important.
They're essential for healthy relationships.
But they could be so hard to set, especially with family.
Especially with family. Because we have all this history, all this baggage.
And we don't want to hurt anyone's feelings.
Right. But the thing is, if you don't set boundaries, you're going to end up hurting your own feelings.
And that resentment's going to build up.
Exactly. And eventually, it's going to explode.
So boundaries are actually a form of self-care.
They are. And they're a form of respect for the other person as well.
Because you're basically saying, I value our relationship enough to be honest with you about my needs.
Exactly. And that's a really powerful message.
So we've talked about the importance of communication and boundaries, but I want to get back to something you said earlier about how family dynamics can be both the best and the worst thing in our lives.
Right, because it's true.
It's so true. Like families can be a source of incredible love and support.
They can be our biggest cheerleaders.
They can be our rock.
But they can also be a source of incredible pain and frustration.
Yeah, and sometimes it's hard to reconcile those two things.
It is. But I think it's important to acknowledge both sides.
Like to hold that duality.
Exactly, because that's the reality of family.
It's messy and complicated and beautiful and heartbreaking all at the same time.
It is. And it's okay to feel all of those things.
Yeah, it's okay to love your family and be frustrated with them at the same time.
Because that's what makes us human.
So let's get real.
Yeah.
What does this book say are the worst parts of family life?
Well, I think one of the biggest challenges is conflict.
Yeah, conflict is inevitable, right?
It's inevitable, especially when you have people with different personalities and different opinions all living under one roof.
Or even if they're not living under one roof.
Yeah.
Conflict can still arise even if you're just talking on the phone.
Absolutely. And the thing is, conflict isn't necessarily a bad thing.
Right. It's how you handle it.
Exactly. It's how you handle it that determines whether it's constructive or destructive.
So what are some healthy ways to handle conflict within a family?
Well, I think the first step is to communicate effectively.
Which we've talked about already.
Right. But it's worth repeating because it's so important.
Yeah. And it's not always easy.
It's not, but it's worth the effort.
So what does effective communication look like in the context of family conflict?
Well, it starts with listening.
Really listening.
Really listening. Trying to understand the other person's perspective, even if you don't agree with it.
Even if you're like, what are you talking about?
Even if you're like, what are you talking about? But trying to see things from their point of view.
And I think that's where empathy comes in.
Exactly. Empathy is huge because it allows you to connect with the other person on an emotional level.
Even if you're disagreeing.
Even if you're disagreeing. And that can make a world of difference in terms of resolving conflict.
So empathy and communication are key. But what about those situations where you just can't seem to see eye to eye? Like, what if you have fundamentally different values or beliefs?
Well, in those situations, it's important to agree to disagree.
The art of disagreeing agreeably.
Exactly, because
Yeah.
you're not always going to be able to change someone's mind.
Yeah, that's okay.
It's okay. And it's also okay to set boundaries.
Right, because you don't have to engage in every argument.
You don't. And sometimes the best thing you can do is to walk away.
And say, we're going to have to table this for now.
Exactly, because
Yeah.
if you keep pushing, it's just going to escalate.
And it's not going to be productive.
Right. So sometimes it's better to just take a break and come back to it later when everyone's calmer.
So we've talked about conflict, but what are some other challenges that families face?
Well, this book talks a lot about the role of jealousy within families.
Oh, jealousy.
Yeah, and particularly sibling rivalry.
Oh, sibling rivalry.
Like, come on. Who hasn't experienced that?
I mean, I'm the youngest, so maybe I instigated a few of those.
Well, we all have our roles to play in those dynamics.
But the book makes it clear that this isn't just kid stuff.
No, it can have serious long-term consequences.
Like how so?
Well, think about it. If you're constantly being compared to your sibling, or if you feel like your parents favor one child over another,
That can breed resentment.
it can breed resentment and it can affect your self-esteem.
Yeah, and those feelings can last for years.
They can last a lifetime.
And they can affect your relationships with other people.
Absolutely, because if you've grown up feeling like you're not good enough or that you're always in competition with someone,
You might carry those patterns into your adult relationships.
exactly, you might be more likely to compare yourself to others or to feel threatened by their success.
And that can sabotage your relationships.
It can. So it's important to be aware of those patterns and to work on healing those wounds.
Yeah, because those childhood wounds can run deep.
They can. And they can affect us in ways that we don't even realize.
So how do we heal those wounds?
Well, I think therapy can be really helpful.
Therapy is always a good option.
It is, because it provides a safe space to process those emotions and to develop healthier coping mechanisms.
And to break those negative patterns.
Exactly, because those patterns can be really ingrained.
But they're not set in stone.
They're not. And with the right support, we can change them.
So there's hope.
There's always hope.
I like that. So we've talked about conflict, we've talked about jealousy, but I want to touch on one more challenge that this book addresses. And that's the whole issue of unrealistic expectations.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
Because families can have a lot of expectations for their members.
They can. And sometimes those expectations are just not realistic.
Like, what if your parents want you to be a doctor?
But you're terrible at science.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or what if they want you to take over the family business?
But you're not passionate about it.
And then there's the whole issue of marriage and children.
Oh, yeah, that's a whole other can of worms.
Like, what if your family expects you to get married and have kids by a certain age?
But you're not ready.
Or what if you don't want to get married or have kids at all?
Right.
And there's the whole issue of who you choose to marry.
Oh, yeah. Families can be really judgmental about that.
Like, what if you fall in love with someone who's from a different culture or religion?
Or someone of the same sex.
Right.
And those expectations can be really damaging.
They can. Because they can make you feel like you're not good enough.
Like you're letting your family down.
And that can lead to a lot of resentment and conflict.
Exactly. And it can also make it really hard to be your authentic self.
Yeah, because you're constantly trying to live up to someone else's expectations.
And that's exhausting.
It is. So what's the solution?
Well, I think the key is to communicate your needs and your boundaries to your family.
Which is easier said than done.
It is. But it's important to remember that you have a right to be happy.
You have a right to live your own life.
Exactly. And your family should respect that.
But what if they don't?
Well, then you might have to make some tough choices.
Like setting some distance.
Or even going no contact.
Which is a really hard decision to make.
It is. But sometimes it's necessary.
Especially if your family is toxic or abusive.
Right, because you have to protect yourself.
Yeah, your mental health is more important than pleasing your family.
Exactly.
So we've talked about a lot of heavy stuff today. But I want to end on a more positive note.
Okay.
Because even though families can be challenging, they can also be an incredible source of love and support.
They can. And it's important to remember that.
Yeah. So what are some of the best parts of family life?
Well, I think one of the best things about family is that they're always there for you.
No matter what.
No matter what, they've seen you at your best and your worst, and they still love you.
Unconditionally.
Unconditionally. And that's a really special thing.
It is. And I think families also provide a sense of belonging,
A sense of history.
a sense of continuity.
Exactly. Like you're part of something bigger than yourself.
And that can be really comforting.
It can.
Yeah.
Especially in times of stress or uncertainty.
So even though families can be challenging,
They're worth it.
they're definitely worth it.
Because at the end of the day,
They're the people who know us best.
and who love us the most,
And that's a really beautiful thing.
it is.
Okay, so we've talked about some of the heavier aspects of family, like conflict, jealousy, expectations. But I want to shift gears a bit and talk about some of the more positive aspects.
Yeah, good stuff.
The good stuff, exactly.
Yeah.
Because even though families can be challenging, they can also be a source of incredible joy and strength.
Absolutely. Like, think about all the good times you've had with your family. The holidays, the vacations, the just hanging out and laughing together.
Yeah, those are the memories that we cherish.
They are. And they're what make family so special.
So this book talks a lot about the importance of shared experiences within families, like how those shared experiences can help to strengthen those bonds.
Right. Because when you have something in common with someone, it creates a connection.
Yeah, it gives you something to talk about, something to bond over.
Exactly. And those shared experiences can be anything from going on a family vacation to just watching a movie together.
We're playing board games.
Or playing board games.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything that you enjoy doing together.
And it doesn't have to be anything big or fancy.
No, it's the little things that often matter the most.
Yeah, like family traditions.
Exactly. Family traditions are so important because they create a sense of continuity and belonging.
They give you something to look forward to.
They do. And they help to create those lasting memories.
So even though families can be messy and complicated,
They're also full of love and laughter.
and that's what we should focus on.
Absolutely, because at the end of the day, that's what really matters.
So speaking of love and support, I want to talk about a concept that's been gaining a lot of traction lately. And that's the idea of chosen family.
Oh, yeah, that's a really interesting concept.
It is, and it's something that this book touches on as well.
So basically, the idea of chosen family is that the people who we consider to be our family are not necessarily the people who we're related to by blood.
Right. It's about those relationships that we choose.
Exactly. The people who we love and support and who love and support us back.
And those relationships can be just as strong and meaningful as any blood ties.
Sometimes even stronger.
Yeah, because you're choosing those people.
You are. And you're choosing them for a reason.
Because they bring something special to your life.
Exactly. And I think that's really beautiful.
It is. And it's something that I think a lot of people can relate to.
Especially in today's world where families are becoming more and more blended.
Right. Like there are so many different types of families now.
There are. And I think that's a good thing.
It is. Because it means that we're expanding our definition of what family means.
We're recognizing that family is about love and support.
Not just about blood ties.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important.
It is because it allows people to create families that feel safe and supportive.
Regardless of their circumstances.
Yeah. And that can make a world of difference.
It can.
So we've talked about a lot of different aspects of family dynamics today, but I want to circle back to something that we touched on earlier, and that's the idea of how our early experiences within our families can have a lasting impact on us.
Oh, yeah, that's huge.
It is.
Yeah.
And it's something that this book really emphasizes.
Because those early experiences shape who we are.
They shape how we view the world, how we relate to others.
They even shape our physical health.
It's crazy how much power those early experiences have.
It is. But it also means that we have the power to change.
To break those negative
If it
cycles.
helps to create healthier patterns.
And that's really empowering.
It is. Because it means that we're not just victims of our past.
We have agency.
We do, and we can choose to create a better future for ourselves and for our families.
I love that. So how do we do that?
Yeah.
Like, how do we break those negative cycles and create healthier patterns?
Well, I think the first step is awareness.
Becoming aware of those patterns.
Exactly. Like noticing how those early experiences are still affecting you today.
And how they might be playing out in your current relationships.
Right. Because once you're aware of those patterns, you can start to change them.
But that's not always easy.
No, it's not. But it's definitely possible.
And there are resources available to help.
Like therapy.
Yeah, therapy can be really helpful for working through those deep-seated issues.
It can, and it can also be helpful for learning new coping mechanisms.
So if you're struggling with some of those negative patterns from your past,
Don't be afraid to reach out for help.
there are people who care and who want to help you heal.
And you deserve to be happy.
You do. So let's talk about some practical tips for creating healthier family dynamics.
Okay.
Like, what are some things that we can do on a daily basis to strengthen those bonds and to create a more positive and supportive environment within our families?
Well, I think one of the most important things is communication.
We've talked about that a lot today.
We have. And for good reason. Because it's really the foundation of any healthy relationship.
Yeah, and it's not just about talking, it's about listening.
It's about really listening to what the other person is saying, trying to understand their perspective, even if you don't agree with it.
And it's about being honest about your own needs and feelings.
Exactly. Because if you're not honest with each other, you're never going to be able to truly connect.
And that connection is what makes family so special.
It is. So make time for each other.
Even if it's just for a few minutes each day,
Put away your phone
turn off the TV.
and just be present with each other.
Yeah, because those little moments of connection,
They add up.
they do, and they make a world of difference.
So make an effort to show your family that you care.
Tell them that you love them.
Do something nice for them.
Just let them know that you're there for them.
Because at the end of the day,
That's what family is all about.
yeah.
It's so easy to get caught up in the day-to-day and forget to nurture those relationships.
Yeah, it's like anything else. You don't water a plant, it's going to die.
Exactly. So we have to make a conscious effort to water those relationships, to give them the attention and care that they need.
And it doesn't have to be anything big or fancy.
Right. It's the little things that matter.
The little things, like just checking in with each other, asking how their day was, really listening to what they have to say.
And being present.
Being present.
Yeah.
Yeah, putting away your phone, turning off the TV, and just giving them your undivided attention.
Because that's what makes people feel loved and valued.
It does, and it's what strengthens those bonds.
So what are some other practical tips for creating healthier family dynamics? Like, what are some things that our listeners can do today to start improving those relationships?
Well, I think one of the most important things is to set boundaries.
Boundaries, we've talked about that before.
We have. But it's worth repeating because it's so important.
Yeah. And it can be really hard to do, especially with family.
It can. Because we feel like we have to say yes to everything.
We don't want to disappoint anyone.
Right. But the thing is, if you're not taking care of yourself,
Yep.
you're not going to be able to take care of anyone else.
Exactly. You can't pour from an empty cup.
So it's okay to say no.
It's okay to set limits.
And it's okay to prioritize your own needs.
Yeah, because healthy relationships are about give and take.
It's not always about giving, giving, giving.
Right, you have to receive too.
Exactly. And that means setting boundaries.
So another tip that I think is really important is to practice forgiveness.
Forgiveness. Oh, that's a big one.
It is. And it's not always easy.
No, it's not. But it's so important for letting go of that past hurt and resentment.
Because holding on to that anger and bitterness,
It's just going to poison you.
it is. It's not going to hurt the other person.
It's just going to hurt you.
So if you can find it in your heart to forgive,
Even if it's just for your own sake,
do.
you'll be glad you did.
And finally, I think it's important to remember that family is a journey.
It's not a destination.
Exactly. There are going to be ups and downs.
There are going to be times when you're close and times when you're not.
But the important thing is to keep showing up,
To try
to keep communicating.
and to never give up on each other.
Because at the end of the day,
Family is all we've got.
and that's pretty special.
It is.
Well, that's all the time we have for today, but I want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive into family dynamics. I hope you learned something and that you feel inspired to create healthier and happier relationships within your own families.
And remember, if you're struggling, don't be afraid to reach out for help. There are resources available, and you don't have to go through this alone.
That's right. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.
This is DigitView.